Good morning. Someone mentioned to me that one of the things they really like about online church is that you can have a coffee at the same time. So I figured if you can, then why don't I? So I'm just going to be having a coffee whilst we're talking this morning. And I'm in the kitchen doing some fairly ordinary things for some reasons which will become clear. Well, it's Christmas and we celebrated the birth of Jesus. And in this reading we've got from the Gospel of Luke today, we're thinking about his childhood. It's quite a long reading which brackets his childhood, as it were. We've got the beginning of his childhood when he's taken into the temple and offered to the Lord as the firstborn son of Mary and Joseph. And then he's back in the temple again in the second episode when he's 12 years old. And probably the significance of that is that it is around the age of 12 or 13 in particular when in Jewish tradition a boy makes his transition from childhood to adulthood. So we have the very beginning of his childhood in the temple, and we have the end, or the beginning of the end at any rate, when he's 12 years old, the end of his childhood also in the temple. So those two bookends, as it were, those brackets around the childhood of Jesus, stand around just this very brief account in the middle of the reading that we had from verse 39, when they finished everything required by the law of the Lord, that is Mary and Joseph it's talking about, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. The child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favour of God was upon him. Now, given that we've got that beginning and that end of Jesus' childhood, and in both places it's at the temple, which is where God's presence was, I think Luke is giving us a clue as to what's going on throughout the whole of Jesus' childhood, which is that he is living in the presence of God. God is with Jesus throughout the whole of his childhood, which is why he grows strong. He grows in stature. Now let's just ponder a little bit about some of the things that they were doing in the two incidents in the temple. At the beginning of Jesus' childhood, Mary and Joseph take him to dedicate him in accordance with the custom and to give an offering. And this was a very ordinary thing to do. It's not unusual or strange or novel. That was what you did. If you were an observant religious person in those days, you made the correct offering, and in the case of a firstborn son, you took him and dedicated him to the Lord. Maybe just a bit like going to church on Sunday, a very ordinary thing to do. I need to find a mug for my coffee. Excuse me a moment. There'll be one in the dishwasher. And again, at the end of the episode, at the end, also in the temple, they go up to the festival, and they go up every year. So again, this is a fairly ordinary thing to do. It's something that happened regularly. It was a bit of family tradition maybe, and there was probably a family grouping, a bit like we've had family groupings possibly over Christmas, and they were doing something that they did every year. These were very ordinary things that were going on, which became important in the lifetime, in the upbringing of Jesus. And let's put those two ideas together, the idea of God being with Jesus throughout his childhood, and the beginning and the end of that episode being characterized by very ordinary everyday things. What we might draw from that then is the encouragement that God is involved in the ordinary everyday things of life. That God is not just God who interacts with us or meets with us on special occasions or when we do certain things, but God is there all the time in every aspect of daily life. No matter how humdrum or plain or insignificant that might seem to be. I'm going to share with you two particular examples of that, people who have latched onto that idea and thought carefully about what it means to experience God or to encounter God in the everyday things of life. The first one is a video. Here's a journalist from the States who has written a children's book based on her awareness of how children can typically see God and think about the things of God in the ordinary everyday things around us. Have a listen and a watch to this.
ABC News correspondent Lindsay Davis joins us now to talk about her new children's book called The World is Awake. Lindsay, welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Terry.
It was really your own son who was the inspiration for this. In what way?
Yes, so we were in the car, and he was just about 2 years old at the time, and out of nowhere, he said, "Mommy, does God open up the flowers?" And I was, at the same time, I was overjoyed because I loved the idea that he was curious about God and also able to make this connection between God and nature.
Yes.
And I figured if he's able to do it as a 2-year-old, then there are so many other toddlers and 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds who are going to be able to get this kind of gentle and meaningful introduction to God.
There's so much bad news in the world today. I mean, you just feel like you're bombarded with it on every side. How important is it for us to teach our children to recognize the good? Because there's more good than there is bad around us, but you can be overwhelmed by the negative.
You're exactly right, and especially because that's my occupation as a journalist, right? And so my son and husband, obviously too, but they often watch the news, and so my son sees these things, and so I really wanted to make a conscious effort to combat that in a way, and at the same time kind of draw more attention to just what he sees and what all kids see. No matter where you are, you can find butterflies and bunny rabbits and rainbows, and those kinds of things are everywhere. And so I just really wanted to reinforce that and the joy of that. And I think so many times, often as adults, we're able to put blinders on. We stop seeing those everyday blessings.
Sometimes I think it's because they're little and it's
right.
It's eye level, and the taller we get, the further we get from recognizing it.
And I think we get used to it, and so we just don't pay attention. So it could be like a snowstorm, right? And I'm thinking, oh boy, it's going to take a long time to get to work. And my son is out there with his gloves, and he says, "Look at the snowflake, look at that." And then I'm
catching it in my mouth.
Yes, right. And you can marvel then over those little things and remember that excitement that you had when it was your first time experiencing.
You know, Psalm 118 says, "This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." Was that a motivation in this?
This book, it was entirely, that's the foundation of Psalm 118:24. And the first words of this book are, "This is the day that the Lord has made." And we changed it to "A butterfly floats through the sun in the shade," right? And so, and there's several references really to the Bible in an applicable way for children. I mean, when you talk about in Luke, when Jesus said to the disciples, he said, "If the people won't praise me, then the rocks will cry out," right? And so we have a line in there about how the rocks would sing if they could. And there's so much, we have a lot of books at home that have, Daniel in the lion's den and Jonah and the whale. David and Goliath is a favorite for my son. But I think as a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, you're not able to realize God's involvement in those storylines. And so this was a way of kind of meeting children where they are.
Kettle's boiling. So it's a fantastic, encouraging story of how that person has just latched on to the natural inquisitiveness and wonder of children. And maybe that was something that Jesus was doing as well. His natural childish inquisitiveness in the temple, asking questions of the teachers there, wanting to know more. And maybe that's something that we can tap into. Sometimes as adults, as we get older, we get very blasé, we get used to things, we take things for granted. But every day around us, there may be all sorts of things that cause us to wonder and marvel and give thanks. I mean, I've just boiled the kettle. I'm so grateful that I have a water supply. I'm grateful for the coffee I'm about to drink. The fact that the gas burns and makes the kettle boil and turns water into steam. There's something wonderful about that if I just stop and pause for a moment and watch it. And I could give thanks to God for the way in which God has made all of these things so wonderful and provided them for our blessing. Just a simple cup of coffee can be a divine moment if we stop and pause and think, gosh, isn't it wonderful what's made this? What a blessing. Thank you, God. Thank you for this cup of coffee, which I'm going to enjoy. There's someone in history who is well known for that line of thinking, and this is a chap called Brother Lawrence, called Brother because he took religious vows and became a monk. He was a Frenchman. He lived in the 18th century. He had been a soldier, but then he went into a religious community. As I say, he became a Carmelite friar. And as a lay brother in the monastery, he was given a job to do. And his particular job was in the kitchen, which is why we're in the kitchen today. And his role was to be the cook for the community. Now, this was not good news for Brother Lawrence, because he was a clumsy fellow and he did not enjoy doing manual tasks. He walked with a limp and he tended to be awkward when he was doing manual things. But his response to that was to seek after God's presence in everything that he did, in all the simple manual tasks that he performed in the kitchen, such as peeling carrots, which I'm going to do now. Multitasking here, preaching and cooking at the same time. And he felt that if God could be in the ordinary things of life, if God is with us all the time, then that must mean in the kitchen doing the things that he didn't enjoy doing, like peeling carrots, just as much as when he was in the chapel praying. And so he made a habit of always praying throughout everything that he was doing and seeking to find God in the ordinary tasks. He would pray, God, please help me with this task. And he would be frank. He would pray, God, I don't want to do this. I don't enjoy doing this, but it is my job. So may I do it for your glory, out of devotion to you, and may I find something more of you in it. And he would look and listen for God as he was going about his tasks. And then at the end of each task, he would offer to God in reflection the work that he had done and seek God's blessing on it. And as a result of that, he became quite well known, quite renowned for practicing the presence of God, which he made a habit. And so his thoughts, his writings, there weren't many of them, but they eventually, after his death, were published in a book called The Practice of the Presence of God. And here's just a brief comment from it, from himself, about what his attitude was towards his job in the kitchen. He says, "For me, the time of activity does not differ from the time of prayer. And in the noise and clatter of my kitchen, while several people are together calling for as many different things, I possess God in as great tranquility as when upon my knees at the Holy Communion. That was his summary of finding God in the ordinary. We're in the Christmas season, and when we celebrated Christmas on Friday, we were celebrating the fact that God came into the world. God became incarnate, became a human person. And as we are reflecting on this morning, as we think about Jesus' childhood, that means that God experienced every aspect of human life, all of childhood, and knowing the presence of God throughout all of that. And by entering into our human life and experiencing it in all its ordinariness and humdrum nature, I was just seeing there's a blue tit has just landed on the window, on the fence outside. So I just want to pause, see if I can show you this. Oh, it just flew off. I don't know if you saw it in time. Just something delightful. God's creation visiting us there. As God enters into human life, so life becomes hallowed. Jesus Christ hallowed human life. Human life is invested with the presence of the divinity in Christ. And so, through Jesus, we can know God's presence with us every day in all the ordinary things. In trips to church, yes, and also in cups of coffee and peeling the carrots, emptying the dishwasher, which will probably be the next task I need to do. So as we go through this Christmas season, the season of incarnation when God came and dwelt amongst us, let's be seeking after God in the ordinary. Let's be mindful of God in all our tasks, no matter how dreary they may seem to us. Let's take a lesson from Brother Lawrence to ask God to be with us and to help us in those things. And let's have a moment, whenever we can remember, of childish, joyful wonder, of looking around us with open eyes and open ears, seeking to find God, giving thanks to God, and marvelling at God's wonderful creation. Thanks be to God.